the quiet suburban neighborhoods of California, where manicured lawns and softly glowing porch lights promised safety, something unseen was moving through the darkness. For decades, families slept believing they were protected by locked doors and familiar streets, unaware that a single figure was watching, waiting, learning their routines. Long before he had a name, long before the world understood the scale of what he had done, he existed only as fear. He was a whisper passed between neighbors, a shadow at the edge of memory, a nightmare people struggled to describe. And long before the case was solved, before DNA finally spoke the truth, one woman became obsessed with finding him. Michelle McNamara was not a police officer, not a forensic expert, not a trained investigator. She was a writer, a researcher, and above all, someone deeply haunted by unsolved crimes. She was drawn to the forgotten cases, the ones gathering dust in filing cabinets, the ones where justice had stalled and victims had been left without answers. When she first encountered the crimes attributed to what would later be known as the Golden State Killer, she sensed something different. This was not just a criminal who killed. This was a predator who controlled, terrorized, and psychologically destroyed entire communities. The crimes began in the mid-1970s. At first, they were burglaries. Homes were broken into, items moved slightly, objects stolen or rearranged in ways that felt deliberate. Victims reported strange sensations, the feeling that someone had been inside their homes while they slept. Then the crimes escalated. A masked man began entering homes at night, tying up couples, whispering threats, stacking dishes on the backs of victims to warn them not to move. He spoke softly, sometimes crying, sometimes mocking. He raped. He vanished. Police struggled to connect the dots. Jurisdictions did not communicate. Evidence was scattered. Fear spread faster than facts. Michelle immersed herself in every report, every victim statement, every old newspaper clipping. She saw patterns others had missed. She noticed how the offender adapted, how he learned from mistakes, how he studied police response. He was meticulous, patient, and terrifyingly intelligent. He stalked neighborhoods for weeks, sometimes months. He knew when people left for work, when lights went out, when dogs barked. He blended into the environment, sometimes riding a bike, sometimes jogging, sometimes posing as a harmless resident. As years passed, the violence escalated again. Murders followed. Victims were beaten, strangled, silenced forever. The offender moved locations, from Sacramento to the East Bay, then to Southern California. With each move, police renamed him. He was the East Area Rapist. Then the original Night Stalker. Later, the Visalia Ransacker. These were treated as separate criminals for years, delaying the realization that one man was responsible for them all. Michelle gave him a name that would finally unite the crimes, the Golden State Killer. Naming him was an act of power. It stripped away the confusion and forced the world to see the scope of his actions. She wrote relentlessly, posting on forums, publishing articles, pushing investigators to revisit cold cases. She connected victims, detectives, and researchers who had once worked in isolation. She believed that truth was buried in forgotten evidence, waiting for someone stubborn enough to dig it up. But this work came at a cost. Michelle lived inside the darkness of these crimes. She listened to tapes of victims crying. She read autopsy reports late into the night. She imagined the killer's movements, his thoughts, his silence. Her obsession blurred the line between investigation and personal torment. Sleep became difficult. Anxiety grew. Yet she could not stop. She felt responsible, as if abandoning the case would mean abandoning the victims themselves. Her book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, was not just about the killer. It was about the people he shattered. The survivors who lived with lifelong trauma. The families who never received answers. The fear that lingered decades later in quiet neighborhoods. Michelle wrote with empathy, anger, and urgency. She addressed the killer directly, daring him to be afraid of exposure. She believed that attention could weaken him, that light could force him out of hiding. Then, tragically, Michelle died in 2016 before finishing the book. She never lived to see the ending she fought for. Her death shocked the true crime community. Many feared the story would remain unfinished, just like the case itself. But the work did not die with her. Investigators continued revisiting the evidence. Advances in DNA technology opened new possibilities. Genetic genealogy, comparing crime scene DNA with public ancestry databases, allowed detectives to trace family trees backward. Slowly, painstakingly, they narrowed the search. A name emerged. Joseph James D'Angelo. A former police officer. A man who had once sworn to protect. He lived quietly. He had a family. He blended in, just as Michelle had always believed the killer would. In 2018, D'Angelo was arrested. The Golden State Killer was finally unmasked. The news stunned the world. After more than 40 years, the silence was broken. Victims finally had answers. Fear gave way to truth. Michelle's book was published posthumously, completed by her collaborators using her notes, drafts, and voice. The title took on a haunting new meaning. He had been gone in the dark for decades, but not forever. Michelle never saw the arrest, but her presence was everywhere in it. Her research, her pressure, her refusal to let the case fade had helped keep it alive. She had believed that monsters survive when they are forgotten. She was right. I'll Be Gone in the Dark is not just a true crime story. It is a testament to persistence. To memory. To the idea that justice, no matter how delayed, still matters. It reminds us that evil often hides in plain sight, but truth has a way of surfacing, sometimes because one person refuses to stop looking. And even in the darkest places, light eventually finds a way in. Long before anyone called him a killer, before the newspapers found names dramatic enough to capture the terror he caused, he was simply an unease in the air. People felt him before they understood him. In neighborhoods across California, residents began to notice small disturbances that were easy to dismiss at first. A gate left open that had always been locked. A window unlatched. Footprints that vanished by morning. At night, dogs barked at nothing. Children woke from sleep sensing movement that could not be explained. These were the earliest signs, subtle warnings that someone was testing boundaries, learning layouts, memorizing lives. The man responsible was methodical. He did not rush. He prowled. He watched houses for weeks, sometimes months, before entering them. He learned schedules, escape routes, police response times. He knew when couples went to bed, when lights went out, when silence settled in. When he finally entered, it was never impulsive. It was planned down to the smallest detail. Shoelaces were cut beforehand to bind victims. Guns were sometimes unloaded, used only for intimidation. He whispered commands, demanded compliance, and punished resistance with cruelty. Control was the point. Terror was the reward. Victims later recalled the sound of his breathing more vividly than his face. He wore masks. He stayed in the shadows. He forced people to listen as he moved through their homes, eating food from their kitchens, opening drawers, reminding them that nothing was private anymore. He stacked plates on the backs of men lying face down, warning them that if he heard even the slightest noise, he would kill their partners. Many survivors said the fear did not end when he left. It stayed forever, embedded in their nervous systems, resurfacing in dreams, sudden noises, or the creak of a floorboard at night. Police departments struggled to keep up. Each jurisdiction treated the crimes as local incidents. Files were kept separately. Evidence was boxed and shelved. Ego, bureaucracy, and outdated systems prevented collaboration. The offender exploited this perfectly. When patrols increased in one area, he moved to another. When sketches circulated, he changed behavior. He learned from police just as much as they tried to learn from him. Years passed. The crimes evolved. Sexual assaults turned into homicides. Couples were murdered in their own bedrooms, beaten and strangled. The escalation suggested rage, confidence, and a growing belief in his own invincibility. And still, no arrest came. Survivors aged. Detectives retired. The killer vanished into ordinary life. Decades later, Michelle McNamara found the case not through a single report, but through a pattern of absence. Too many victims. Too many similarities. Too little resolution. She sensed that this was not just a cold case, it was a failure that had been normalized by time. Michelle approached the investigation differently. She was not constrained by departmental boundaries or procedural habits. She read everything. She asked questions others had stopped asking. She connected dots that had never been allowed to touch. She wrote about the victims as people, not statistics. She refused to let them be reduced to crime scene summaries. She believed that naming the killer, defining him as one entity rather than many fragmented aliases, was essential. Giving him the name Golden State Killer was an act of narrative justice. It unified the crimes and forced a reckoning. Michelle also understood something crucial about fear. She believed the killer followed his own story. That he read about himself. That he fed on anonymity and power. By dragging his crimes into the light, she hoped to unsettle him, to remind him that time had not erased what he had done. Her obsession deepened. She spent nights listening to recordings, staring at maps, replaying timelines. She imagined his movements, his choices, his silences. This closeness came at a cost. The weight of the crimes pressed into her personal life. Anxiety followed her. Sleep escaped her. The darkness she studied began to seep inward. Yet she continued, driven by a sense that stopping would mean letting the killer win again. As technology advanced, DNA that had once been useless gained new power. Samples collected decades earlier were reanalyzed. Genetic genealogy transformed the investigation. Instead of matching DNA to known criminals, investigators traced family trees. Slowly, a shape emerged from the data. A man who had lived quietly. A man who had once been trusted with authority. Joseph James D'Angelo had been a police officer. He knew investigative methods. He understood patrol schedules. He knew how evidence was handled and mishandled. This knowledge explained his confidence, his precision, his ability to disappear. He had lived a life so ordinary that neighbors described him as unremarkable. This ordinariness was part of the horror. Evil did not look monstrous. It looked familiar. When he was arrested, decades of silence collapsed in a single moment. Survivors wept. Families breathed for the first time in years. The myth of the untouchable predator dissolved into the reality of an aging man in handcuffs. In court, victims spoke of the lives stolen from them, not only through violence, but through fear that never ended. D'Angelo listened, expressionless, as his crimes were named aloud, one by one. Michelle McNamara did not live to see this moment, but her presence was undeniable. Her work had kept the case alive when it was easiest to forget. Her book became her voice, speaking even after she was gone. I'll Be Gone in the Dark stands as both an investigation and a memorial, a reminder that justice can be delayed but not erased, and that persistence, even when lonely and exhausting, can change outcomes. This story is not just about a killer. It is about time. About memory. About the danger of letting silence replace accountability. It is about the cost borne by victims when systems fail, and the power one determined voice can have in forcing the truth back into the open. The Golden State Killer hid in the dark for decades. But darkness, no matter how deep, is never permanent.